She raised the kids. She supported the law degree. She waited through the long hours and late nights. But when he left her for someone younger, Betty Broderick snapped. They married in 1969, and by the following year, Betty found herself pregnant. Dan believed it too, or at least said he did. But something changed when he got a taste of that success. According to Betty, Dan became controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. But before long, Betty was hearing steamy gossip from Dan's colleagues. Apparently, Linda was not just a hard worker, but also willing to work overtime in Dan's hotel room. Twice she entered Dan's property, once leaving a dead fish on his doorstep. Then came November, and by this point, everyone knew Betty was unhinged. She sent Dan letters, emails, even Christmas cards, all filled with menacing messages. Then there were the phone calls. 134 of them between October and November alone. And they weren't just friendly chatter. They were often bizarre, nonsensical tirades, sometimes lasting 2 hours. She'd call him at night, wake him up, yell at him for cheating, for taking her money, for taking her children. Today she is 74 years old and still in prison. Until next time, don't forget, some wounds are self-inflicted. In the more than 3 decades since she took Dan's life, she's never shown remorse, never apologized. She maintains her innocence, saying she was the victim, not the perpetrator, that Dane was the monster and she just wanted him to feel the pain he'd caused her. And then she'd hang up, only to call back a few minutes later and start all over again. Betty says she confronted Dan, who denied anything was happening. But Dan elbowed her, broke free, and ran to his car. That was when Betty pulled out a gun and shot him in the chest. Then she turned the gun on herself, but the bullets didn't work. They were blanks. Dan survived, but barely. Meanwhile, Betty had shot herself in the head, but that wound wasn't serious either. At trial, she told the jury she hadn't meant to kill Dan, that she'd shot him in self-defense. But the prosecution pointed out she'd gone to Dan's house with a gun and 180 rounds of ammunition, plus a list of other men she wanted to kill. Betty had admitted to buying the gun just weeks before the murders. And although she'd been sentenced to prison for stalking Dan, no one thought he was in any real danger. Everyone assumed Betty was all talk, but Betty knew the truth. And on March 1st, 1989, she called Dan's office and left a furious voicemail. His new girlfriend, Linda, was kneeling beside him, lifeless. When officers arrived at Dan's home, they found his diary. And in it, an entry dated July 1988. "I'm in love with Linda," he wrote, "and will probably be in love with her for the rest of my life." Both had been shot twice, blood stained the sheets. And nearby, a single shoe lay abandoned on the carpet. A shoe that matched the prints in Betty's home, the place where Dan had spent 17 years with the woman he betrayed. "Linda, if you're screwing my husband, I want you to know you're re-screwing a married man and you will get your throat slit." Dan was shocked. He couldn't believe she'd slipped so far over the edge. He played the message for his colleagues, some of whom thought it hilarious. By the time Danny finished medical school and then law school, Betty had given birth to their 4 children. And when she showed up in court, she yelled, "Don't look at me, you son of a bitch. You're going down." She spent 3 months in jail awaiting trial. And when she was released, she was ordered not to contact Dan or come within 100 yards of his home. She said she'd given up her career to support his dreams, put her own ambitions aside, made him the most wonderful years of her life, only to have him erase her from his. They lived in a beautiful home in San Diego. On paper, they had the perfect marriage. This is the true story of a woman who said she'd been erased and made sure she wouldn't be forgotten. In the early 1960s, Betty and Dan Broderick met. But Betty worked as an interior decorator while Dan studied, and she believed that when he became successful, they would share the rewards. By the time the children left home, Betty felt like a stranger in her own house, and then he met Linda Kolkina. Dan was 50 and Linda was 25 when he hired her as his legal assistant. 2 months later, Betty drove a rental car into Dan's house, narrowly missing his girlfriend. She was arrested. Dan pressed charges, but soon she was back in court for violating those orders. Dan moved out and Betty followed him. When he tried to leave his condo, she blocked his path. Then she lunged for him. The next morning, Dan's body was found riddled with bullets. Betty turned herself in at a police station 45 minutes away. Betty was charged with murder, but from the beginning, she insisted she was innocent. And now Dan was dead, along with the woman he loved. The jury found Betty guilty of second-degree murder. This has been Dark Motives. If you enjoyed this true story of a woman scorned, follow for more softly spoken true stories. Real, haunting, and never forgotten.